The enormous Mario franchise has given us so many incredible games, and has sub-series spanning more genres than most people could name. But with more than 300 games released, no one can be surprised there are some duds in there. And it's exactly those duds I want to focus on today. We're gonna go past every Mario spin-off series in chronological order and pick the worst game in every series. Simple as that. And so we start with the series that started it all, Wrecking Crew. Yeah, but before the name Super Mario Bros. Was even a thing, the groundwork for the first ever Mario sub-series had already been laid, as Versus Wrecking Crew predates Super Mario Bros. And would kick off the trilogy of Wrecking Crew games, consisting of a sequel 1 year later and then another follow-up 13 years later. Nowadays, I would wager most people are familiar with this title through Foreman Spike's appearance in the Mario movie, but it essentially was Mario's first ever spin-off series, despite being older than the mainline games. Anyway, we really only have two options here, as Wrecking Crew 98 is so much better than the original two games that it cannot be in contention here. For those original two though, it's a bit of a tricky call, because they both set out to do something completely different, and both have not held up incredibly well, I think it's fair to say. The arcade original is meant to be a full-on multiplayer focused title, you can't even play it alone, while the NES release is a completely single-player experience, and focuses more on puzzle elements. That means that in the year 2025, the second game is simply the more interesting one, should you have a random hunger for relatively niche retro titles. Not only do you need to convince someone else to play with you in order to experience the arcade title, it also has significantly fewer levels to play, a mere 2 compared to the 100 of the NES game. I honestly wouldn't recommend either in modern times, but the arcade title is definitely the worst of this weird little series. But with Wrecking Crew covered, we can now dive into the series I suspect you have actually played, starting with the 2D Super Mario games that kicked off the franchise proper. With games spanning nearly 40 years, this is the largest sub-series in the Mario franchise, despite a notable absence during the early 2000s. While I would consider none of these games to be truly bad, like some entries we'll see later in this video, I would say there are 4 titles that don't weigh up to the rest. The first of that group is New Super Mario Bros. 2. This is just such a nothing game. It's not bad, it works, it's perfectly fine in a vacuum, but that's the thing, it wasn't released in a vacuum. This was the third of 4 New Super Mario Bros. Games, released at a time when everyone was long done with this style of games, and it didn't even have the multiplayer of the console titles to salvage it as a fun party platformer. In a way, this game mirrors the situation of Wrecking Crew, being a single player focused game sandwiched between 2 more multiplayer focused ones. But unlike Wrecking Crew for NES, this game lacks the depth necessary to set it apart from its multiplayer counterparts. However, this game is simply too modern and works too well to truly be in consideration for the title of worst 2D Mario game. A similar thing can be said about 2 of the other candidates, Super Mario Land and Super Mario Run. The first Super Mario Land is an incredibly impressive game to run on a friggin' Game Boy, and a remake of this game would be a very fun experience, but the original game is a hard to enjoy one nowadays, with stiff controls and bland graphics. But like I said, at the time this game was fantastic, that has to be considered. Super Mario Run, and yes, this is considered a mainline game by Nintendo, goes for something completely different as well, seeing as it's an auto runner on mobile phones, which could I guess be something you prefer to regular Mario platforming gameplay, but that definitely does not apply to me. But similarly to NSMB2, it's a perfectly fine and fun game in a vacuum and succeeds at what it sets out to do, which cannot be said about our final candidate, and as such, winner of the dubious title of worst 2D Mario game, The Lost Levels. Meant to be the real Super Mario Bros. 2, I would wager you're familiar with the story of this game, right? It was considered too hard for Western audiences, so remained Japan exclusive while the West got a reskin Doki Doki Panic, blah 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 blah. And what can I say? Genius call on Nintendo of America's part. Not that I believe Western gamers are less skilled than Japanese ones, but The Lost Levels isn't really difficult in a way that's fun and challenging. It's just unfair, it's frustrating. It's the kind of stuff that could turn you away from a game series, which could have possibly had massive ramifications for the future success of the Mario brand. At this point in time, playing The Lost Levels is only reserved for those who truly wish to experience everything Mario has to offer, or fell in love with the game before time moved on. It is in my eyes easily the worst 2D Mario game, and yet I still wouldn't call it bad and unplayable, because in a vacuum, it's still a 2D Mario experience, and those are always at least a tad bit enjoyable. And because the Lost Levels didn't kill the franchise, it would continue to have a new sub-series added to its roster in 1990, being Dr. Mario. This is another very difficult series to talk about in this context, because most of the games are incredibly similar, with even the mobile game Dr. Mario World, which has since been discontinued, being not too different all things considered, even if it is a watered down experience. As such, I would say the questionable honor of the worst game in the series has to go to the title that does the core Dr. Mario experience in the least enjoyable way, and that is the original Game Boy title. Similarly to Super Mario Land, this title is rough to play nowadays, and graphically inferior, obviously, meaning there's basically no reason to ever play this title nowadays. Even if you wanted the oldest, most retro Dr. Mario experience available, the NES version is right there. It's a much better experience than whatever remained after they crammed the game on Nintendo's oldest handheld, which again is super impressive for the time, but also leads to a game that simply doesn't hold up more than 30 years later. 2 years after the release of the original Dr. Mario, another spin-off series saw the light of day on the SNES, Mario Kart. I don't think I need to explain too much about how this series works, nor do I have to mention how amazing the many titles in this series have been, with each and every entry becoming a flagship title on the console they released on. But at the same time, that also means picking a worst entry is difficult, especially since the series has had two very odd additions in recent years, being Mario Kart Tour and Home Circuit. Both are clearly not meant to provide the same level of depth as the mainline games, and so I feel quite confident in calling them worse experiences than their contemporaries, like Mario Kart 8 or 7. But how do they stack up compared to the older games, like the original Super Mario Kart? Personally, I would say they are better, as in this comparison, they turn their weakness into a strength. Tour and Home Circuit are not as good as 8 because they are different, but they are better than Super Mario Kart because they are different. Still with me? Simply put, interest in retro games aside, why you would ever play Super Mario Kart over one of the newer and simply better titles is beyond me. Even if you prefer an older feel or sprite-based gameplay, Super Circuit and Mario Kart 64 are much more enjoyable experiences. But for Tour and Home Circuit, there is no equivalent. They're not redundant, there is no improved experience for those games. So based on that, I would say, not for the first time in this video, it's an older game in the series that wins the questionable title of worst game. Here though, I do want to make one distinction. If we would be going off worst game at the time of its release, I would say my pick would be Home Circuit. After all, Super Mario Kart is one of the best games on SNES. Home Circuit is a gimmick. And we go from one of Mario's most successful sub-series to another, as 1996 kicked off 3D Mario with Super Mario 64. This is the big one. No matter which game I name here, I'm gonna piss some people off. We're looking for the 8 out of 10 among the 10 out of 10s here. The great game among the fantastic games. Each of these is a super enjoyable experience and rightly has its fans. And for the first time in this video, the winner is not gonna be one of the oldest games. Super Mario 64 is still an enjoyable experience today, even if the controls are a little rusty, and while I know Mario Sunshine is definitely a candidate for the worst 3D Mario game for most of the fanbase, I don't agree. The setting and mechanics of this game are so unique, bright and fun, you would never see me rank it as the worst, even if I do recognize it is flawed in some ways. In fact, you could arguably say it's more flawed than the game that I do consider to be the worst, which is Super Mario 3D Land. This game has always felt like the black sheep of the 3D Mario family. While most 3D Marios push the envelope and go for a truly unique and mesmerizing experience, this game is just 2D Mario but now 3D. And that's cool, but it doesn't weigh up to the grandeur of a Galaxy, Odyssey, or even Sunshine. What has further hindered 3D Land's position is the simple fact that a better game in the same fashion was released not too long after it, in the form of 3D World, which basically does everything 3D Land does a few notches better. That doesn't make 3D Land an uninteresting experience or not fun, but it does make it the least fun out of all 3D Mario games. Next, we have another big Mario spin-off title, first released in 1998, Mario Party. I don't think there is another Mario sub-series where the topic of worst game is so often discussed as Mario Party, with several entries that are just full-on bad, something we haven't seen much in this video. 9, 10, Star Rush, Island Tour, the top 100 all are pretty viable candidates and just frankly not good. Whereas 3D Mario was picking the great game among fantastic ones, this is picking the god-awful game among the trash ones. I think that just looking at the list, that this honorable winner would have to be one of the 3DS titles, simply because the home console games function much better as multiplayer games, which still remains the soul of Mario Party. As bad as 9 and 10 are, at least you can play them with friends and maybe have a semblance of a good time. And Bowser Party is actually pretty decent, so 10 wouldn't be the worst of that alone. But yeah, the 3DS are just you and these unenjoyable games, no one else to save you. And out of those three, I would say the worst is Mario Party, the top 100. How is it possible for a single player game to release with so little content in it? The idea of including the 100 best minigames was novel at the time, but the Switch games have since done a similar concept much better, rendering the top 100 completely obsolete. Not that it was ever good in the first place, but at the very least the other bad games have something unique to offer. The top 100 has nothing, it's essentially just minigame mode game. Genuinely one of the worst games to ever bear the Mario name. A few months after Mario Party had become a thing, the next Mario staple would be established. Sports games, starting with Mario Golf. Despite being the oldest, Mario Golf has actually been one of the more consistent sports series, I would say, without a true outlier in a negative sense of the word. As such, the worst game is not really a bad game, and it's even one with good ideas and easily the best graphics in the series, as yes, I would say it's Super Rush, the latest entry on Switch. This game is the embodiment of all style, no substance. Graphically and stylistically, it's a great game, and the many new ways to play seem like fantastic additions at first sight that can really help spice up the, I would say, monotone sport that is golf. But after playing it for a bit, you begin to get the feeling these modes were added to make trailers look exciting, rather than being actually fun to play in the long term. A game like Toadstool Tour is way less flashy, but there is a lot more depth to it that invites you to keep playing. That just isn't there for Super Rush. Its longevity is further hurt by poor implementation of online play, which should be a top priority for modern Mario sports games, but apparently wasn't there, resulting in a title that's cool for a few hours, but starts to get stale quickly and isn't inviting to return to at all. Next, we have another Mario sports game, Mario Tennis, which could also be argued to have started in 1996 on the Virtual Boy, but that game is not considered part of the core Mario Tennis series, despite being a Mario branded tennis game. That decision on Nintendo's part does make picking the worst game much easier though, as Mario's Tennis on Virtual Boy was really the only competition left for Mario Tennis Ultra Smash on Wii U. This is another one of the worst games to ever bear the Mario name, a title so devoid of content, quality, soul and care. Those are terms often thrown around when talking about Mario sports games on Switch, and don't get me wrong, I would say they're accurately used there too, including by me later in this video. But at least you need to look under the hood there to realize it. With Ultra Smash, it's on full show. There is no more to this game than standard boring tennis courts and the most vanilla and uninteresting cast of characters we have ever seen, save for the Sprixie Princess, I guess. Combine that with the gimmick of this title, which is just the use of a Mega Mushroom sometimes, and get a mess of a game that I can say made fans of Mario sports games very concerned about the future. Nothing about this game felt like Camelot or Nintendo cared. It was just meant to get a few easy bucks based off the Mario name, and that's it. Then we have another spin-off series we can wrap up quickly, being Paper Mario. Beloved and at times amazing, this is another super popular series, but also one where it feels like literally everyone is in agreement over what the worst game is. Sticker Star. Of course it's Sticker Star. To some, this game marked the beginning of the end. To others, it was a heavy misstep followed up by two acceptable but not amazing titles, but to all, it is absolute garbage. I don't think I've ever seen someone defend Sticker Star as being Paper Mario's worst game. I've seen a few folks say it wasn't total garbage and somewhat enjoyable somewhere, but no other Paper Mario game is even close to being this bad. While I would agree that by the time Color Splash released, mechanically, Paper Mario was far from back to greatness, and at least that game has an enjoyable story with fun writing, resulting in a game that is far from amazing, but is still a good time, I would say. I won't pretend like I come back to it frequently, but I enjoyed my time with it. Sticker Star is just terrible across the board. Bad gameplay, bad level design, bad mechanics, bad characters, bad writing, it's not it. Paper Mario has a sort of inner charm that could never make me consider it truly unplayable, and it's not like the game is a technical mess or anything. It all works, but it cannot hold a candle to the rest of the series. Simple as that. Since Paper Mario 64 released in the 2000s, we have now entered a new decade and the dawn of the GameCube, which introduced us to a brand new spin-off series, Luigi's Mansion. Partly because there are only 3 games in the series, Luigi's Mansion is a series with an incredibly good track record, and 3 great games, but similar to 3D Mario, there has to always be a worst. And out of these 3, my pick would be the second entry, Dark Moon. Whereas the first Luigi's Mansion is a short but super charming and unique adventure, and the third is very obviously the best if you ask me, Dark Moon is a little more predictable and formulaic, I guess are the words. I do think the HD release on Switch helps give the game some added graphical flair, which it lacked compared to the other 2 games, but mechanically, the way Dark Moon has you engage with the setting, the several mentions of Evershade Valley, doesn't hit the same as the centralized locales of the other 2 games. Had Dark Moon not had a mission structure, we would have had a very difficult question on our hands here, but that core mechanic has such a big impact on the enjoyment of the game that it cannot weigh up to the other 2 titles. Dark Moon is far from a bad game, far from it, but I would consider it the worst Luigi's Mansion game. We're going back to RPG titles now, with the Mario and Luigi series debuting in 2003. This is another series where we definitely need to look at the later games. I think that's widely agreed upon, with especially the first 3 games being fan favorites. Dream Team and Brothership definitely get more criticism, and that's deserved. They're definitely not perfect games, but it's the game that's sandwiched in between that's easily the worst in my opinion, Paper Jam. This could have been such a special title. A crossover between the 2 Mario RPG series is such a brilliant idea that could serve as a love letter to both series, incorporating worlds, characters and mechanics from both series in an amazing way, but instead, we get by far the most bland Mario and Luigi game we have ever seen. No unique locales, no interesting characters, a story that doesn't grab you, none of that. Gameplay wise, Paper Jam is not terrible, it's definitely no sticker star and it's a perfectly serviceable Mario and Luigi game, but it's more in the comparison to other games in the series where it doesn't hold up. It also suffers from a similar problem to Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon of all things, with a structure that leans heavily on missions, and once again, it makes for a predictable and formulaic experience. I personally feel like, even more so than New Super Mario Bros. 2, 3D Land or Sticker Star, or even Ultra Smash, this game embodies the stillness and blandness of the Mario franchise at the time of its release. And in a series that has always thrived on creativity and uniqueness, that makes for a lackluster title. We continue with another series that started on the GBA, being Mario vs Donkey Kong, a puzzle series that has always been quite overlooked, I would say. The series has always been living in relative obscurity on handhelds, with games that I would argue blend together a bit, even if they can actually be quite different in how they function. As time went on though, I feel like the core mechanics of the games went stale, and as such the 3DS entries received a lot less praise than predecessors did, despite functionally being pretty similar games, not necessarily a step down. The exception is the most recent original title though, Mini Mario and Friends Amiibo Challenge, which I guess you could consider a spin-off title of a spin-off series, but I'm counting it. This game was a free digital title for both Wii U and 3DS, clearly meant to be more of a supportive title for Amiibo rather than a new entry in the series. And lo and behold, that philosophy does not lead to great games. It didn't for Animal Crossing, it didn't for Mario Party, and it doesn't for Mario vs Donkey Kong. It can hide behind the fact it's a freebie for Amiibo owners, but a game like Mario vs Donkey Kong is not hard to at least make a little interesting, and this game feels it even that. It's not unplayable or anything, it's just kinda whatever. Why would you ever boot this up instead of the other Mario vs Donkey Kong games? Next, we're quickly gonna move through 2 Mario sports titles that are incredibly easy to nail down. First, Mario Baseball, a series consisting of the grand total of 2 games, the latter of which is simply a bigger, better version of the original. I don't think there is a single thing Mario Superstar Baseball does better than Mario Sluggers, with the possible exception of controls, although I personally think baseball is one of the few kinds of games that actually benefits from motion controls. I don't mind the Wii Remote one bit, and I'm far from a motion control fan, but for sluggers it adds to the experience if you ask me. And keep in mind, I say that as someone who has nostalgia for the GameCube title and not sluggers, since that was never released in Europe. So yeah, Superstar Baseball is a fantastic game and one of the best Mario sports games, but it's still the worst entry in the Mario Baseball duology. The other Mario sports series introduced on the GameCube is Mario Strikers, a series Nintendo made damn sure we could play here in Europe, the football capital of the world. Like I kinda alluded to in my introduction of this segment, this is another series where it is abundantly clear what game is the worst in the series. I genuinely don't think you'll find a single soul that would consider Battle League better than the original Strikers and Charged. Those simply were much more fun games with more interesting concepts and content to it. Battle League is devoid of life, soul and content, all pillars of what make the Mario sports games fun to begin with. And sure, it's still football, and sure, it's still a good time with friends, but similarly to Super Rush earlier, it lacks the depth necessary to make these games fun to play for more than a week. All I can say is that I hope this game didn't kill the franchise, because I want to see Mario Strikers successful again. And finally, we have the two most recent Mario spin-off series, both crossovers with other franchises. First, there was Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games, which debuted on the Wii and appears to be well and truly dead after Sega lost the rights to the event. It had a good run though, with some interesting and enjoyable titles, even if this series did always have a sort of premium shovelware vibe to it, intriguing as it ended up being. Anyway, we're here to pick the worst of these minigame fests, which I would say is pretty clearly the Rio 2016 edition. Not for the first time today, I'm afraid I'll have to say it's mostly a significant reduction in content that has hurt this game, beyond just generally the formula of these titles getting stale. Compared to Tokyo 2020 though, the game feels significantly more barren, especially on 3DS, which does have a single player adventure type of mode, Road to Rio, but after two prior games that featured something similar, it's hard to get excited over this anymore. A lack of depth is always a problem, but like we saw with Mario Party before, it becomes especially a big one on handhelds, which tend to be more single player focused, and that is something Rio 2016 is simply badly optimized for. There is not enough in here to warrant playing it on your own, and while I can excuse that for the original title on DS, the concept of Mario and Sonic together in a game was enough to warrant excitement back then, but nearly 10 years later that can no longer be said. Now, all we have is a minigame compilation that isn't even the best of its kind on a handheld that isn't ideal for goofing off with friends. It's a lose-lose situation basically. And last but not least, we have the Mario plus Rabbids series, consisting of Kingdom Battle and Sparks of Hope. Both good games, both solid experiences, and both titles worthy of recommendation. But while Sparks of Hope has a lot more content and meat on its bones, I would actually say Kingdom Battle is the better title. And that has everything to do with difficulty, which is not always a big factor, but for a strategy game, which these are, it plays a major role. After all, the entire point of this genre is to come up with tactical plans and moves and feel a sense of accomplishment when you pull them off and win. But Sparks of Hope was, in my opinion at least, too easy to really give me that feeling. Kingdom Battle is hardly the lost levels either, don't get me wrong, but it at least was a tad more challenging and focused more on that core strategy gameplay, which is where the intrigue comes from. Sparks of Hope is a fuller game, but it also means that the core is weakened, which can sometimes result in the best game in the series, but in this case it has the opposite effect in my opinion. Let it be clear though that just like with Mario Baseball, both Mario plus Rabbids games are more than good. It's just that one has to be better than the other. And with that, we have covered every single Mario sub-series. What will be your picks for the worst games? Share it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribe to the channel to stay updated on all my future Mario content coming up. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.